I stopped by my wife's office to surprise her with flowers. But as I waited at her desk, a familiar object caught my eye. A heavy silver fountain pen. The exact one I had custom engraved for my daughter right before she vanished without a trace 8 months ago. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I twisted the cap, just a nervous habit, but instead of the nib appearing, a heavy mechanical click echoed through the room. The massive oak bookshelf behind her desk shuddered and began to slide open. What I saw inside that hidden room stopped my heart dead. My daughter was sitting on a bare mattress, thin-chained and absolutely terrified. If you are listening to this story right now, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. My name is Harrison Cole. I am 70 years old. I have spent my adult life building a massive logistics empire in Chicago. I started with a single rusted delivery truck, working 18-hour days until I turned it into a fleet of 400 rigs dominating the East Coast. But all the money and power in the world means absolutely nothing when your world is violently ripped apart. 8 months ago, my 28-year-old daughter Maya disappeared. She was my only child from my first marriage, my absolute world. The police found a suicide note in her apartment. They told me she had relapsed into drug addiction, could not handle the pressure, and ran off to end things, leaving behind a shattered father. I refused to believe it. I spent millions on elite private investigators chasing every phantom lead, desperate for just a sliver of hope. Every trail ran cold. The nights were the hardest. I would sit in my empty house staring at her photographs, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. My only anchor during this waking nightmare was Victoria. Victoria is my 48-year-old second wife. She is elegant, poised, and seemed endlessly supportive through my grief. She even started a non-profit organization, the Maya Hope Charity Foundation, dedicated to helping young adults struggling with addiction. I truly thought she was my savior. I thought she was the only thing keeping me from losing my mind. I had absolutely no idea I was sleeping next to a monster. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when I decided to leave the corporate office early. Victoria had been working late every single night at the charity headquarters, pouring her soul into the foundation's upcoming gala. I wanted to show my appreciation, to remind her how much I loved her. I bought a massive bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers, and drove across town to surprise her. When I arrived at the foundation's office building, the receptionist smiled warmly. She told me Victoria was down in the basement archives, pulling some old donor files, and that she would be right back. I told the receptionist not to announce me. I wanted to catch my wife off guard, maybe take her out for a nice dinner. I walked into Victoria's corner office. It was immaculate, a perfect reflection of her personality. The room was bathed in the warm afternoon sun, with massive windows overlooking the sprawling Chicago skyline. I set the lilies down gently, on the edge of her pristine mahogany desk. I took a deep breath, looking around the room, feeling a rare moment of peace. That was when I saw it. Sitting next to her keyboard tray, hidden under a stack of folders, was a heavy silver Mont Blanc fountain pen. I felt the air leave my lungs. I reached out my fingers, shaking, and picked it up. Engraved along the polished metal in elegant cursive was Maya's name. I had custom ordered this exact pen for her 25th birthday. Maya never went anywhere without it. The police report explicitly stated that she had taken all her personal belongings when she ran away. Why in God's name would Victoria have it sitting casually on her desk? My mind raced desperately, trying to find a logical explanation. Did the police find it and return it to her? Did Victoria find it, cleaning out Maya's old room? But she never told me. She knew how much I agonized over every single thing that belonged to my little girl. I held the cold metal in my palm, feeling a sickening weight in my stomach. Maya had this nervous habit of twisting the cap of the pen when she was deep in thought. Without realizing what I was doing, my thumb and forefinger replicated that exact motion. I twisted the heavy silver cap. There was no smooth unscrewing motion. Instead, a sharp, heavy mechanical click resonated from deep inside the pen. It was a remote trigger, A deep thud vibrated through the hardwood floorboards beneath my feet. I stumbled backward in shock as the massive floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelf behind Victoria's desk shuddered. With a low hydraulic hum, the entire wall began to slide open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor hidden right behind the office. The air that drifted out of the gap was stale cold and smelled of harsh chemical disinfectants. I dropped the pen. It clattered against the floor. I stepped into the hidden space, the blood roaring in my ears so loudly I could barely hear myself breathing. At the end of the short, dimly lit corridor was a reinforced soundproof glass cell. Inside, sitting on a bare-stained mattress, was a frail, emaciated figure. Her clothes hung loosely on a terribly bony frame. A heavy metal chain connected her pale ankle to the steel frame of the bed. She slowly raised her head, shielding her eyes from the sudden stream of light spilling in from the main office. My heart stopped. It was Maya. My beautiful, vibrant daughter. She was alive. But she looked completely broken. Her eyes, sunken deep into her face, widened in absolute sheer terror as she recognized me standing in the doorway. She scrambled up, rushing to the thick glass, slamming her bruised hands against it. Though the heavy soundproofing completely muffled her voice, I could read her trembling lips perfectly. "Dad, run." Before my brain could even begin to process the absolute mind-shattering horror of my daughter locked in a cage inside my wife's office, a sound from the main hallway froze me dead in my tracks. The sharp, unmistakable clack of Victoria's designer heels approaching the door. And right beside her, the heavy thudding footsteps of Damien, her massive, intimidating security guard. They were laughing about something. They were seconds away from walking through the door. I had no weapon. I am a 70-year-old man. If they saw me standing there, if they realized I had discovered their horrific secret, neither Maya nor I would ever leave this building alive. I had to make the hardest decision of my entire life in a fraction of a second. My fingers moved purely on instinct. I gripped the heavy silver cap of the Mont Blanc pen and twisted it back to its original position. The sharp mechanical click echoed again, louder this time, or maybe it just felt that way to my panicked mind. The massive oak bookshelf groaned and began to slide shut. I watched the gap narrow, my eyes locked on Maya's terrified, sunken face, until the very last possible fraction of a second. The solid wood sealed shut just as the brass doorknob of the main office began to turn. I spun around, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs, and snatched the massive bouquet of white lilies from the mahogany desk. I forced my posture to slump. I let my shoulders sag. I commanded my trembling hands to channel the frailty of a broken, grieving 70-year-old man rather than the absolute terror of a father who had just seen his missing child locked in a cage. The door swung open. Victoria walked in. She was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her hair immaculately styled, her expression a mask of pristine professional elegance. Right behind her was Damien. He was a mountain of a man, his custom suit barely concealing the thick, muscular build of a seasoned enforcer. He scanned the room with cold, predatory eyes before stepping back to stand guard by the door. Victoria stopped dead in her tracks, clearly startled to see me standing by her desk. A brief, almost imperceptible flash of genuine panic crossed her features, but she recovered with terrifying speed. Her face melted into a soft, compassionate smile. "Harrison, darling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "What are you doing here? You should have told my assistant you were waiting." I stepped forward, forcing my hands to shake just enough to sell the illusion. "I brought you these," I muttered, offering the white lilies. "I know how hard you have been working on the charity gala. I just wanted to surprise you, to tell you how much I appreciate everything you are doing to honor Maya." As I spoke my daughter's name, bile rose in my throat. I wanted to reach out and strangle her. I wanted to command Damien to step aside and tear that wall down with my bare hands. But I maintained my fragile, trembling facade. Victoria reached out and took the flowers, bringing them to her nose and closing her eyes. "Oh, Harrison, they are absolutely breathtaking. You are so thoughtful. But you really should be resting at home. The doctor said your stress levels are dangerously high. She reached out and placed her manicured hand on my arm, softly stroking my sleeve. Her touch made my skin crawl. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to flinch. Just as I opened my mouth to reply, a sound interrupted us. Thump. It was a heavy, muffled noise coming from directly behind the oak bookshelf. A desperate, muted strike against the thick glass of the hidden cell. Maya. My beautiful girl was trying to signal me. She was trying to scream for her father. Damien tensed immediately, his hand drifting dangerously close to the inside of his jacket. Victoria did not even blink. Her smile remained perfectly fixed, though her grip on my arm tightened just a fraction. What was that? I asked, letting my voice waver. I stared blankly at the bookshelf, portraying the perfect image of a confused, disoriented old man. I heard a noise behind the wall. Is someone back there? Victoria let out a gentle, patronizing sigh. She stepped squarely between me and the bookshelf, blocking my line of sight completely. Oh, darling, it is just the plumbing in this ancient building. The pipes shudder and knock all day long. I have told the building manager a dozen times to fix the water pressure. Thump. Another muffled strike. My heart bled knowing the agony my daughter was enduring just inches away. I looked at Victoria, widening my eyes in feigned distress. It sounds like someone knocking, I whispered, clutching my chest. Victoria, what if it is her? What if Maya is trying to reach us? Victoria pulled me into a tight embrace, pressing my face against her shoulder, so I could not look at the wall. Damien relaxed slightly, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Harrison, please, Victoria murmured, rubbing my back soothingly. You are letting your grief overwhelm your senses again. Dr. Evans warned us about this. He said the exhaustion would cause auditory hallucinations if you did not start taking your sedatives regularly. You are hearing things because you miss her so much. We all miss her. But you have to stay grounded in reality. She pulled back and looked me deeply in the eyes, her expression a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was gaslighting me with flawless precision, using my supposed grief to invalidate my own reality. I forced a tear to roll down my cheek. I nodded slowly, letting my shoulders drop even further. You are right, I rasped, wiping my eyes with the back of my trembling hand. I am sorry. I just keep hoping she will walk through the door. I just want my little girl back. I am losing my mind, Victoria. I really am losing my mind. The satisfaction that gleamed in her eyes was sickening. She fully believed she had me entirely under her control. She believed I was just a senile, pathetic old fool, completely oblivious to the monster standing right in front of him. You are not losing your mind, darling, she assured me, her voice smooth as silk. You are just a loving father going through an unimaginable tragedy. That is exactly why I am working so tirelessly down here. In fact, I just came up from a meeting with the board. I signed a check for $100,000 to open the new wing at the Youth Rehabilitation Center. We are naming it after Maya. We are going to save so many young lives in her honor. Every word she spoke was a calculated stab to my chest. She was using my daughter's tragedy, a tragedy she herself had engineered to funnel my money into her own twisted schemes. That is wonderful, Victoria, I managed to say, my voice thick with fake emotion. Maya would be so incredibly proud of you. I am proud of you. I need to go home. I need to lie down. My chest feels very tight. Victoria kissed my cheek. Damien will walk you to your car, Harrison. Please take your medication and get some sleep. I will be home right after I finish filing these donor reports. I nodded meekly and turned toward the door. Every step I took away from that bookshelf felt like stepping on broken glass. I was leaving my daughter behind in that dark, cold cage. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to fight to tear the room apart. But the cold, rational part of my brain, the part that built a logistics empire from the ground up, knew that acting on impulse would be a fatal mistake. If I confronted them right now, Damien would simply draw his weapon and shoot me dead. He would drag my body into that hidden room, and then he would execute Maya. Victoria would spin a tragic story about how the grieving father finally snapped and took his own life. I walked down the long carpeted hallway, with Damien trailing silently 2 paces behind me. I maintained my slow, unsteady shuffle all the way to the elevator. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby, keeping my head bowed, until the metal doors slid shut, separating me from the cartel enforcer. As the elevator descended, the facade instantly vanished. My trembling hands morphed into tightly clenched fists. My slumped shoulders squared. The tears dried, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I walked out of the building and stepped into the crisp Chicago air. The afternoon sun felt entirely different now. The world had fundamentally changed. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, locked the doors, and sat in the quiet isolation of the cabin. My breath came in ragged, furious gasps. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. I knew I could not simply dial the police. A tactical breach of a reinforced building took time to organize. If patrol cars pulled up with sirens blaring, Victoria would know her cover was blown. She would have a contingency plan. She would order Damien to silence the only witness, and by the time the authorities breached the hidden room, my daughter would be dead. I could not risk it. I needed an airtight strategy. I needed to understand exactly why my wife was keeping my daughter locked in a secret cell, instead of simply demanding a ransom. I needed to uncover the financial trigger she was patiently waiting for. I started the engine, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. Victoria thought she was dealing with a frail, oblivious old man. She thought my grief had blinded me to her deception. She had absolutely no idea that she had just awakened a predator. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward my sprawling, empty estate, the burning rage in my chest crystallizing into a deadly, singular focus. I was going to dismantle her entire life piece by piece, and I was going to bring my daughter home. The massive wrought iron gates of my estate parted, and I drove my car up the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, a familiar sound that usually brought me a sense of comfort. Today, it sounded like the grinding of teeth. I parked in the garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the profound silence for a few minutes. I needed to center myself. I needed to bury the image of Maya shivering in that glass cage, deep inside my mind, locking it away where Victoria could not see it. When I finally stepped out of the vehicle and walked through the heavy front doors, the fragile, broken old man returned to the surface. But beneath my skin, my blood ran ice cold. I dropped the grief-stricken act the moment I crossed the threshold into the privacy of my study. For 40 years, I had built a logistics empire by seeing the things other men overlooked. I had crushed ruthless competitors by anticipating their strategies and dismantling their supply chains before they even knew they were under attack. My business instincts, which I had allowed to dull in the suffocating fog of my morning, suddenly snapped back to life with a brutal, predatory focus. I was no longer a grieving father weeping over old photographs. I was a chief executive officer facing a hostile takeover, and the enemy was sleeping in my bed. I sat behind my mahogany desk and began to mentally dissect Victoria. If I was going to beat her, I needed to understand her routine, her habits, and every single anomaly I had previously ignored. The clues were always there, hidden in plain sight, masked by her overwhelming devotion and sweet smiles. I just had to look at them through the lens of a man who knew his wife was a kidnapper. The first glaring inconsistency hit me almost immediately. The lunches. For the past 6 months, Victoria had insisted on personally packing her own meals for the office. At the time, I thought it was just a quirky, humble habit. Maria, our housekeeper, was a phenomenal cook who prepared all of our meals. Yet every single morning, Victoria would kindly but firmly wave Maria out of the kitchen. Victoria claimed she preferred a simple salad and a turkey sandwich, and she always packed 2 identical brown paper bags. She told me the second bag was for her young, overworked intern, a girl she claimed never had time to eat. I had praised her generosity. Now the memory of those 2 bags made my stomach churn. One bag was for Victoria. The other bag, the identical sandwich and salad, was keeping my daughter barely alive in that freezing basement cell. The meticulous care Victoria took to ensure Maria never saw inside those bags was not humility. It was operational security. She could not risk the housekeeper noticing the strict caloric rationing. Then came the second anomaly, one that was far more sinister and aggressive. Over the last 3 months, Victoria had been gently but relentlessly pushing me to sign over a comprehensive medical and financial proxy. It started as a soft suggestion during breakfast. She would hold my hand, look at me with those wide, sympathetic eyes, and tell me how worried she was about my declining health. She would bring up moments where I had forgotten a simple appointment or misplaced my keys, weaponizing my natural grief-induced brain fog to build a narrative of severe mental decline. Just last week, she had brought a slick, fast-talking lawyer to the house. Not my lawyer, not the firm that handled my corporate affairs, but a stranger she had found. He placed a thick stack of documents on our dining room table. Victoria had poured me a cup of tea and whispered that this was just a precaution, a way to protect my legacy, so I could focus entirely on healing. She wanted complete, uncontested control over my estate, my personal assets, and my medical decisions. I had delayed signing it, telling her I wanted my own legal team to review the phrasing. Her flash of irritation that day had been brief, instantly replaced by a loving smile, but now it made perfect sense. She was laying the groundwork to declare me legally incompetent. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the ceiling, piecing the puzzle together. I was dealing with a highly sophisticated, deeply sociopathic predator. But one crucial piece of the equation was still missing. The motive. This was not a standard ransom kidnapping. In a traditional kidnapping, the perpetrators snatch the victim, send a proof-of-life photograph, and demand a wire transfer or a bag of unmarked bills. They want quick cash and a fast exit. But Victoria had kept Maya hidden in a custom-built soundproof bunker for 8 excruciating months. She had gone to the immense trouble of forging a suicide note, staging a drug relapse, and watching me spend millions on private investigators while she comforted me in my bed. This was a long con. A meticulously planned long-term operation. If she simply wanted my money, she could have divorced me and taken half of my personal wealth in the settlement. If she wanted the corporate empire, she could have waited for me to sign the proxy and then quietly slipped a lethal dose of medication into my evening tea. But she did not do that. She kept Maya alive. Why risk feeding and hiding a hostage for nearly a year? The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. She needed Maya alive for something specific, something she could not forge, steal, or manipulate out of me. I closed my eyes, running through every single financial asset, every trust, every corporate holding in my entire portfolio. What did Maya have that Victoria needed? What was the financial trigger that required my daughter to keep breathing? Victoria was waiting for an event. She was holding Maya in that cell, feeding her scraps, waiting for a specific date or a specific authorization that only Maya could provide. Once she had it, once she acquired whatever it was she was waiting for, Maya would no longer be useful. Victoria would dispose of her, and then she would execute the medical proxy to take control of me. I opened my eyes, staring at the locked safe in the corner of my study. I needed to tear through my own financial records. I needed to audit my own life with the ruthless precision of a forensic accountant. Somewhere in those thousands of pages of legalese and banking statements was the exact reason my daughter was chained to a bed. I had to find that trigger. I had to understand her endgame before she reached it. I stood up, walked over to the safe, and began turning the combination dial. I was going to find out exactly what my wife was trying to steal, and then I was going to burn her entire world to the ground. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed twice, its deep tones echoing through the cavernous silence of the estate. It was exactly 2 a.m. I had been sitting in the dark for hours, perfectly still, listening to the house settle into sleep. Upstairs, Victoria was sound asleep in our master bedroom. She had come home after 9, kissing my cheek and offering me warm milk and a strong sedative playing the devoted wife to absolute perfection. I had taken the pill, palmed it under my tongue, and flushed it down the bathroom sink the moment she turned her back. Now the house was a tomb. It was time to go to work. I stood up and moved silently across the thick Persian rug. My joints ached, a sharp reminder of my 70 years, but adrenaline pushed the physical pain into the background. I crept down the long corridor toward my private home office. I knew every inch of this sprawling house. I knew which floorboards groaned and which ones remained silent. Victoria thought she controlled the environment, but she was a newcomer to my world. I reached the heavy oak doors, slipped my key into the brass lock, and turned it with agonizing slowness to prevent the mechanism from clicking loudly. The door swung open, and I slipped inside, closing it securely behind me. The room was pitch black. I did not turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I moved directly to my desk and booted up my primary computer. The monitor flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across my face. Almost instantly, a prompt filled the screen. It was a sophisticated security application demanding an authentication token. Victoria had installed it 2 months ago. She claimed it was a necessary upgrade recommended by her consultant to protect my personal wealth from offshore hackers. She spun a terrifying tale about a friend whose portfolio was drained overnight. I had nodded along, playing the grateful husband, and allowed her to set up the software. She controlled the administrator passwords. She believed she had locked me out of my own digital life. But Victoria severely underestimated the man she married. I did not build a multinational logistics empire by trusting third-party vendors with the keys to my kingdom. The day after she installed her shiny firewall, I had my chief technology officer silently install a mirrored backdoor access protocol buried deep within the motherboard registry. It was completely invisible to her software. I bypassed the login screen with a sequence of keystrokes she knew nothing about. The security wall dissolved, and I was in. The digital vault of my entire life was open before me. I bypassed my domestic accounts and routed my connection through encrypted virtual private networks, tunneling directly into my offshore corporate holdings. My business structure was a labyrinth of shell companies, holding groups and diversified investments spread across 5 continents. It was designed to be impenetrable to competitors and tax auditors alike. But tonight, I was auditing myself. I pulled transaction logs from the past 8 months, filtering specifically for the time frame immediately following Maya's supposed disappearance. I looked for routing errors, blocked transfers, and denied access requests. For 20 minutes, the screen showed nothing but routine corporate maintenance. I dug deeper, accessing the legacy files, and then I found it. Buried beneath layers of holding company data was a digital trail of desperate, frantic activity. It was a series of access requests originating from an IP address registered to the Maya Hope Charity Foundation. Victoria had been quietly pinging a very specific, heavily guarded offshore account. She had tried to breach it 14 times over the last 6 months. Each attempt had been met with an automatic, hard-coded denial. I clicked on the account profile, and a wave of profound sorrow washed over my cold fury. It was the Elysium Trust. It was a massive ironclad trust fund set up by my late first wife, Maya's mother, shortly before she passed away. She came from a family of old, quiet wealth, and she wanted to ensure that our daughter would always be financially independent, completely insulated from the volatile swings of my corporate empire. The trust was currently valued at just over $80 million. It had been sitting there growing quietly, accumulating interest for years. I had not thought about the Elysium Trust in a decade, primarily because I legally had zero access to it. My first wife had structured it with aggressive foresight, employing a team of ruthless estate lawyers to ensure the money went exclusively to Maya. I opened the core charter documents of the trust, scanning the dense legalese to find exactly what was stopping Victoria from draining it. The conditions were brutally strict. The first release clause stated that the entire $80 million principal would automatically transfer to Maya's personal control on the exact day of her 30th birthday. Maya was currently 28. That meant Victoria had a 2-year waiting period before the funds were technically liquid. But if Maya was legally declared dead, the money would automatically revert to a designated charitable foundation chosen by the trust executors, bypassing me entirely. Victoria could not just kill Maya and take the money. That explained why she forged a suicide note and staged a disappearance rather than a confirmed death. A missing person is not legally dead for 7 years. I scrolled down further, my eyes burning from the screen glare, until I found the second release clause. It was an emergency liquidation protocol. My first wife had worried that Maya might need sudden massive capital for a medical emergency or a critical business venture before she turned 30. The trust could be liquidated immediately, bypassing the age restriction, but the security measures were absolute. It required a verified live biometric signature from the sole beneficiary. Not a password, not a forged document. The bank required a real-time synchronized upload of Maya's fingerprint and a retinal scan processed through a proprietary terminal provided by the trust managers. The words on the screen blurred as the horrifying reality finally clicked into place. The final puzzle piece locked in completing a picture so dark and depraved it made my blood run cold. This was the chilling reason my daughter was still breathing. Victoria did not keep Maya locked in that soundproof glass cage out of some twisted sense of mercy. She was not feeding her scraps to keep her alive out of guilt. She needed her alive for the biometrics. She was keeping Maya in cold storage, breaking her spirit, starving her down to nothing, conditioning her through absolute terror, so that when the time came, Maya would be too weak to resist. Once I signed the new medical proxy, Victoria would request the proprietary terminal force my exhausted daughter to scan her eye and then flawlessly execute her without leaving a single trace behind. I slowly closed the heavy laptop, my suffocating grief entirely replaced by a cold, lethal, unyielding, calculating fury. I was going to systematically burn Victoria's fake world to ashes, and I would not stop until my daughter was brought back home. The sun was just beginning to bleed through the heavy curtains of my study, casting long, pale shadows across the room. I sat perfectly still, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. The digital trail I had just uncovered painted a terrifying picture. Victoria was definitely not just a simple, greedy opportunist. She was a meticulous, cold-blooded architect of suffering. She had constructed an invisible death row for my only child, and she was waiting for me to hand her the executioner switch. My initial instinct, the visceral reaction of a terrified father, was to dial 911. I wanted to send an army of police cruisers smashing through the glass doors of that charity foundation. I wanted deafening sirens blaring and armed tactical teams kicking down walls. I wanted to see Victoria dragged out in handcuffs, screaming as they tore her precious foundation to pieces. I wanted the whole world to witness the absolute monster hiding behind her perfectly manicured charitable facade. But the cold, rational logic that had built my logistics empire instantly crushed that impulse. A conventional police raid would undoubtedly be a swift and brutal death sentence for my beloved daughter. I could not let that happen. Victoria and Damien were heavily entrenched. If they heard a single siren or saw a single flashing light, Damien would execute Maya before the authorities even made it past the lobby. This was a highly volatile hostage situation, governed by a lethal dead man's switch. I needed a precise, surgical, completely silent intervention. I needed professionals who operated completely outside the rigid, noisy boundaries of local law enforcement. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a prepaid cell phone. I kept a handful for sensitive negotiations, but this call was a matter of life and blood. I dialed the first number knowing my life depended on it. John Prescott answered on the second ring. John was my corporate attorney, a man whose ruthlessness was legendary in Chicago. He possessed an icy demeanor and a brilliant mind. His loyalty to my family was absolute. I told him to cancel his appointments and wait for my instructions. Then I called the second number. Rex Carter was an ex-SEAL running an elite private security firm. We went back 20 years. I funded his company when he returned from deployment with nothing but a duffel bag. Rex did not ask questions when I told him I needed a ghost operation. I instructed both of these dangerous men to meet me immediately at an abandoned industrial park located far outside the city limits. We could not risk meeting at our usual places. Victoria was capable of deep surveillance. I had to assume my spaces were compromised. 2 hours later, a massive 18-wheeler from my fleet idled quietly by a decaying warehouse. The driver, a fiercely loyal employee who had transported freight for my company for over 3 decades, stood vigilant guard outside in the cold night air. I slowly climbed into the back of the dark, cavernous, windowless trailer. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, plunging the space into absolute darkness before the dim overhead LED lights flickered to life. The trailer had been retrofitted for secure transport, completely lined with sound-dampening foam and electromagnetic shielding. It was a mobile fortress entirely disconnected from the grid. As the massive diesel engine roared to life and the truck began to roll onto the highway, moving randomly through the dark city streets to avoid any possible tracking, I turned to the 2 men waiting at the metal folding table bolted to the cold steel floor. John Prescott sat perfectly straight, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the industrial surroundings. Rex Carter leaned against the steel wall wearing dark tactical gear, his arms crossed over his broad chest. Neither man spoke a single word of complaint about the incredibly strange venue. They simply waited in respectful silence for me to begin explaining. I placed my hands flat on the cold metal table. I did not waste time with pleasantries or emotional overtures. I laid out the entire horrific reality in precise chronological order. I told them about the hidden room behind the bookshelf at the charity office. I described the heavy metal chain, the thick, soundproof glass, and the emaciated, absolutely terrified face of my missing daughter. I watched the blood drain from John's face. I saw Rex's jaw tighten, his posture shifting from relaxed observation to coiled, aggressive tension. Then I laid out the sinister financial motive driving this entire nightmare. I explained the offshore accounts, the $80 million trust fund, and the terrifying biometric release clause that required Maya's live fingerprint and retinal scan. I watched them process the cold, mathematical cruelty of Victoria's long game. She had kidnapped my daughter, faked a tragic relapse, and played the role of a grieving, supportive wife, all to manipulate me into signing a medical and financial proxy. Once she had my signature, she would force Maya to unlock the trust, and then she would dispose of us both without a trace. The silence in the moving trailer was absolute, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the heavy tires against the asphalt. Neither of these hardened men had ever encountered such calculated domestic evil. They sat completely motionless, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just laid out before them on the metal table. John was the very first person to break the heavy silence. His voice was a very harsh, raspy whisper. He swore he would legally dismantle Victoria until she begged for mercy. But Rex stepped forward, pulling a rugged tactical tablet from his gear bag. He placed it on the table, projecting a high-resolution digital schematic of the Charity Foundation headquarters. While you were driving here, I pulled the municipal zoning records and the architectural blueprints for that building. Rex stated, his tone completely devoid of emotion. I filtered the data looking for structural anomalies or unrecorded renovations. He tapped the screen, zooming in on the basement level. Victoria filed a permit for acoustic dampening and structural reinforcement 14 months ago. She claimed the charity needed a secure archive room for sensitive donor data. But the materials she ordered do not match a simple archive. She hired a black market contractor, a specialized crew known for building subterranean cartel stash houses. Rex traced a glowing red line on the digital map. The space behind her office is a fully functioning panic room. The walls are lined with reinforced steel plates. It has an independent closed-loop air circulation system that does not connect to the main building's network. The door is a bank vault-grade security portal. If she locks it from the inside, or if Damien barricades himself in that corridor, we cannot simply kick the door down. A traditional explosive breaching charge would take way too long and make far too much noise. They have created an impenetrable fortress right in the middle of the city. The reality of his words hung heavily in the confined space of the moving trailer. We were not just dealing with a simple kidnapping. We were up against a fortified, self-sustaining bunker. My daughter was trapped inside a cold steel tomb, breathing recycled air, and the woman who held the key was sleeping peacefully in my bed. I looked down at the glowing schematic tracing the digital outline of my daughter's prison. We needed a flawless strategic plan that completely bypassed the heavy steel walls and the complex security locks entirely to save her life tonight. Rex tapped the screen of his tablet, closing the architectural blueprints and opening a highly encrypted communication channel. He issued rapid orders to his cyber warfare division. Less than a mile away from the Charity Foundation headquarters, a nondescript plumbing repair van sat silently in a dark alley. Inside, 3 elite digital specialists probed the invisible perimeter of Victoria's fortress. Rex explained the panic room was on a closed loop, completely severed from the building's primary internet connection. However, the black market contractors made a critical, arrogant mistake. They had installed a wireless diagnostic port to monitor the independent air filtration system. It was a tiny sliver of a digital signal bleeding through the concrete, but for Rex's team, it was a wide-open door. We sat in the moving 18-wheeler surrounded by the diesel engine's hum, staring at the blank tablet screen. The tension was so thick, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I pictured Maya sitting in that freezing room, wondering if I had truly abandoned her, wondering if the brief moment she saw my face was just a cruel trick of her exhausted mind. I silently promised her I was coming back. I promised her I would unleash hell on the people who put her in that cage. Rex stared intently at the monitor. His specialists were actively working to isolate that faint diagnostic signal, piggyback onto its frequency, and essentially pry open the digital lock, without triggering the automated security protocols Victoria had undoubtedly paid a fortune to install. If they moved too fast, the system would detect the intrusion and alert Victoria's phone immediately. If they moved too slow, we lost precious time that Maya simply did not have. We watched as lines of complex code began to rapidly scroll across Rex's tablet, illuminating our grim faces in the dark trailer. The specialists were executing a brute force penetration using customized decryption algorithms designed to mimic the normal background noise of the city. Then, the scrolling code suddenly stopped. A single blinking green light appeared in the center of the screen. "We are finally in," Rex whispered, his voice incredibly calm, given the absolute gravity of what they had just accomplished. They bypassed the internal firewall and established a stable, undetected connection to the central hub of the panic room. Rex's thick fingers moved quickly across the glass surface, navigating through the hidden network directories until he found the internal surveillance feed. He tapped a file icon labeled with a generic serial number, and the screen flickered briefly before stabilizing into a crystal-clear, high-definition live video feed. I stopped breathing. The image on the screen was a direct view into the darkest corner of my daughter's private hell. The camera was mounted high in the corner of the soundproof glass cell, providing a complete view of the barren clinical space. The walls were painted a stark, blinding white, designed to maximize psychological disorientation. There was no natural light, no sense of time, just the relentless glare of the overhead fluorescent bulbs. And there, sitting on the thin, stained mattress, was Maya. She had her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her thin arms wrapped around her legs in a desperate attempt to conserve body heat. The cold air pumping through that independent filtration system was designed to keep her weak docile and compliant. I watched her shiver violently, a continuous, uncontrollable tremor that shook her fragile frame. The heavy steel chain secured to her ankle looked monstrous against her pale skin. Her beautiful face, the face I had kissed goodnight 1,000 times when she was a little girl, was hollow and bruised. Dark, heavy shadows encircled her eyes, painting a portrait of profound sleep deprivation and absolute terror. I reached out my trembling fingers, hovering just inches over the digital screen, wanting to touch her face, wanting to shatter the glass that separated us. A sharp, burning tear escaped my eye and rolled down my cheek. I had built an empire. I had accumulated unimaginable wealth and power. I employed thousands of people. Yet in this moment, looking at my broken child, I felt like the most profound failure on the face of the earth. I had invited the monster into our home. I had funded the very foundation that was serving as her prison. I had paid for the bricks and the steel that formed her cage. The guilt threatened to swallow me whole, a dark tide of self-hatred that nearly brought me to my knees, but I forced it down. I converted every ounce of that agonizing guilt into pure, unadulterated rage. I promised myself that I would not shed another tear until Victoria had been thoroughly and systematically destroyed. Just as I pulled my hand away from the screen, John Prescott cleared his throat. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He had been unusually quiet since I laid out the initial facts, his brilliant legal mind working through the variables and analyzing the threat landscape. He placed the folder flat on the metal table right next to the tablet showing my shivering daughter. While Rex was securing the visual confirmation of the hostage, I activated my most aggressive intelligence contacts to run a deep background check on Victoria's shadow. John said, his voice deadly serious. The man she calls Damien. You assumed he was just a hired thug, a muscle-bound mercenary she picked up from a private security firm to do her dirty work. You were dangerously wrong. John opened the folder, revealing a series of grainy surveillance photographs and heavily redacted federal documents. His real name is not Damien. It is Mateo Vargas. He is not a bodyguard. He is a high-level cartel fixer operating out of the southern border. He is currently wanted by international authorities for orchestrating multiple extortion rings and executing high-profile murders for a major criminal syndicate based in Sinaloa. The air in the trailer seemed to instantly evaporate. The magnitude of the situation had just violently shifted. We were no longer dealing with a greedy sociopathic wife executing a domestic financial crime. We were standing on the precipice of a war with international organized crime. Victoria is not just a woman trying to steal a trust fund, John continued, tapping the federal dossier. She is directly tied to a cartel network. Vargas does not work for her. He is her handler. He is there to ensure the cartel gets whatever money she has promised them. If we trigger an alarm, if we make one wrong move, Vargas will not hesitate to kill Maya, and he has the professional training to disappear before the police ever arrive. The stakes had just skyrocketed into the stratosphere. My daughter was not just a pawn in a greedy divorce scheme. She was the collateral in a multi-million-dollar cartel debt. I looked back at the screen at Maya shivering in the cold. I looked at Rex and John. I knew exactly what had to be done next to save my daughter's life. The sun was bleeding over the horizon when the 18-wheeler deposited me near my estate. I slipped through the side entrance just as the automated lawn sprinklers hummed to life. My mind raced with the terrifying reality of Mateo Vargas, but physically I seamlessly slipped back into the skin of the broken widower. I climbed the grand staircase and entered the master suite. The sound of running water echoed from the ensuite bathroom. Victoria was taking her morning shower, preparing herself for another day of playing the angelic philanthropist. Her designer handbag sat unattended on the vanity. I did not have much time. Rex had provided me with a military-grade microtransmitter during our meeting in the truck. It was a flat circular device no larger than a standard coin, wrapped in a specialized adhesive housing designed to evade standard sweeping equipment. I moved silently. My hands were perfectly steady. The trembling old man was completely gone. I unclasped the gold hardware of the purse and slid my fingers deep into the custom silk lining. I found a hidden seam near the reinforced base, peeled back the adhesive strip, and pressed the transmitter firmly against the inner leather wool. It vanished. I snapped the clasp shut just as the water in the bathroom abruptly stopped. I shuffled over to the dresser, slumped my shoulders, and picked up Maya's photograph. When Victoria walked out, wrapped in a plush white towel wiping the steam from her eyes, she found me exactly where she expected me to be. I was staring blankly at the picture, the perfect image of paternal despair. She offered me a sympathetic sigh, kissed my cheek, and told me to get some rest. An hour later, I watched her car pull out of the driveway through the sheer curtains of my study window. As soon as the taillights vanished past the iron gates, I locked my heavy study doors and booted up my highly encrypted laptop. I plugged in the receiver dongle Rex had configured for me and slipped a pair of noise-canceling headphones over my ears. The initial audio feed was a chaotic mess of rustling fabric and muffled road noise as Victoria drove across the city. I sat at my desk, staring at the audio waveform dancing across the monitor. I listened to her order a coffee at a drive-through window. I listened to her cheerfully greet the Charity Foundation receptionists. Her public voice was sickeningly sweet, dripping with a practiced, artificial warmth. She complimented an intern on her outfit. She discussed a floral arrangement for an upcoming gala. It was entirely mundane, entirely sickening. I waited listening with the patience of a sniper. The audio shifted abruptly as a heavy door closed, followed by the distinct mechanical click of a deadbolt. The ambient background noise of the busy office vanished instantly. She had entered her private office, the room directly adjacent to my daughter's hidden cell. A second set of heavy footsteps echoed through the transmitter. It was a slow, deliberate tread. Victoria's public mask dropped the second she was alone with Damien. "You are late," Victoria snapped. Her voice was completely devoid of its usual melodic warmth. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with raw, impatient authority. "Traffic on the interstate," the man replied. His voice, stripped of the silent bodyguard persona, was rough and jagged. It carried the heavy weight of a seasoned cartel enforcer. Mateo Vargas did not take orders well. He sounded like a man who merely tolerated Victoria because she was the key to a massive payday. "We do not have time for traffic," Victoria hissed. "I need you to double-check the acoustic seals on the perimeter wall. I thought I heard a vibration yesterday when the old man was standing near the bookshelf. If he figures out she is back there before I secure the proxy, this entire operation falls apart." A heavy chair dragged across the floor. "The old man is a ghost," Vargas grunted dismissively. "He is too heavily sedated to notice his own shadow." "He is not the problem right now, Victoria. You are the problem. My employers down south are running out of patience. They did not finance this little charity front and provide me for a year-long vacation. They want their capital returned, and they want the promised premium. You assured them this trust fund would be liquidated months ago." Victoria's breath hitched slightly, a microscopic display of fear that brought a grim wave of satisfaction to my dark heart. "You know the strict protocols," she argued, her voice tight and defensive. "The Elysium Trust is a nightmare to crack. I had to wait for the biological trigger. I had to let him grieve long enough to break his cognitive resistance. I cannot just force him to sign the proxy at gunpoint. If the estate lawyers suspect coercion, they will freeze everything and launch a massive federal investigation. It has to look like a perfectly voluntary transfer of medical and financial authority due to severe mental decline." Vargas slammed his heavy hand on a desk, the sharp crack causing the audio waveform on my screen to spike violently into the red. "They do not care about your legal inconveniences, Victoria," he growled, stepping closer to her. "They care about the $80 million you promised them. I received a secure message this morning. The grace period is officially over. You have until the end of this week to complete the biometric transfer and wire the funds. If the money is not resting in their offshore accounts by Friday midnight, they are cutting their losses. They will order me to clean the site. That means I put a bullet in the girl in the basement. I put a bullet in you, and I burn this entire building to the foundation." The silence that followed his explicit threat was absolutely suffocating. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk so hard, my knuckles burned white. I was listening to the explicit, non-negotiable execution order for my beautiful daughter. "I do not need until Friday." Victoria replied, her voice trembling slightly before hardening into a chilling, sociopathic resolve. "I have the solution ready." The private doctor I bribed finalized the medical paperwork late yesterday afternoon. He officially drafted a diagnosis of severe rapid-onset dementia and profound psychological instability for Harrison. I am bringing the lawyer back to the estate tomorrow evening. I will drastically increase his sedative dosage tonight. By tomorrow, he will not even know what day it is. He will sign the proxy document simply because I tell him it is a sympathy card for Maya. Once I have the absolute legal authority over his estate, I will bring the banking terminal here. We pull the girl out of the cell, force her eyes open for the retinal scan, push her thumb onto the glass, and initiate the emergency liquidation. I will wire the cartel funds within 48 hours. Vargas grunted in grudging approval. 48 hours, Victoria. Do not fail, or we all die horribly. The audio feed cut out. I had 48 hours. The dead air in my headphones lasted for exactly 3 minutes. I sat frozen in my leather chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly, my forearms cramped. My mind was racing through the brutal mathematics of Victoria's timeline. 48 hours. 2 days to dismantle a fortified cartel bunker and save my daughter from execution. Just as I reached for my phone to update Rex and John on this terrifying deadline, the static crackled. The microtransmitter inside Victoria's purse reconnected. The heavy acoustic doors of her office must have blocked the signal temporarily when Vargas paced near the threshold. Now his heavy footsteps were moving back toward the center of the room. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, desperate to catch every single syllable. "You need to be prepared for every variable," Vargas was saying, his rough voice vibrating with barely contained hostility. "The local police are not a threat right now, but if the old man has a lucid moment and calls a private investigator, or if a rogue patrol car spots my men doing perimeter checks, we have to act instantly. We cannot afford a standoff. We cannot afford a hostage negotiation. The cartel does not negotiate, Victoria. We erase the problem and we vanish." "I am fully aware of the protocol, Mateo," Victoria replied, her tone dripping with arrogant confidence. "That is exactly why I paid your black market contractor an extra $100,000 to install the failsafe. I am not an amateur. I have controlled this entire situation from day one." "Then prove it by keeping your tablet charged," Vargas snapped. "I saw it sitting on your desk yesterday with the battery indicator flashing red. If that screen goes black, you lose control of the ventilation override. If we get breached, if I have to draw my weapon and hold the line at that door, you are the one who has to press the button. I cannot be shooting and managing the software at the same time." My blood turned to ice. A ventilation override. A button on a tablet. I closed my eyes, picturing the high-resolution schematics Rex had shown me in the back of the moving truck. The panic room had an independent closed-loop air circulation system. Rex thought it was just designed to keep the room self-sustaining during a prolonged siege. But Victoria had twisted it into an execution chamber. "The tablet is plugged in right now," Victoria said, a hint of defensive anger in her voice. "The application is running in the background. The connection to the basement terminal is completely stable. If anyone tries to force their way into this building, if I hear a single police siren, or if you give me the signal, I just have to open the app and tap the red icon. The system will seal the intake valves instantly. And then the carbon monoxide flushes the room." Vargas finished for her, his voice flat and clinical. "The pressurized canisters are wired directly into the air ducts. Once you tap that screen, the gas displaces the oxygen in the cell. It is colorless. It is odorless. The girl will feel sleepy. She will lie down on that mattress, and she will be dead in 45 seconds. There will be no screaming. There will be no panic. By the time a tactical team manages to cut through the vault door, she will be gone and the gas will have dissipated through the exhaust vents. It will look like she suffocated from a mechanical failure." I stopped breathing. 45 seconds. A single tap on a glass screen. My beautiful daughter, who had endured 8 months of starvation and psychological torture, was sitting in a gas chamber. Victoria had built a lethal dead man's switch right into the architecture of the building. The sheer sociopathic brilliance of the trap was paralyzing. If I called the authorities, if a SWAT team rolled up to the charity foundation with armored vehicles and bullhorns, Victoria would look out her window, smile her sweet philanthropic smile, and tap a button on her tablet. Maya would die quietly in the dark before the police even breached the lobby. Victoria would then play the devastated victim, claiming she had no idea a cartel had hidden a hostage in her basement. "Make sure your hand does not shake when the time comes," Vargas warned. "You have played the grieving wife for so long, you might actually start to believe your own lies. When the order comes down, you press the button. No hesitation." "I will not hesitate," Victoria answered coldly. "I do not care about the girl. I only care about the trust fund. Once the money clears the offshore accounts, she is nothing but dead weight. I will flush the room myself, just to be done with her whining." The audio feed went silent again as they changed the subject to banking logistics, but I had heard enough. I ripped the headphones off my ears and threw them onto the desk. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. The parameters of the mission had just shifted from difficult to nearly impossible. A dynamic breach was completely out of the question. We could not use explosives on the vault door. We could not use flashbangs. We could not even risk the sound of shattered glass or a heavy footstep in the hallway. If Victoria felt threatened for even a fraction of a second, she would reach for her tablet. If Vargas saw a shadow move across the corridor, he would give the execution order. I dialed Rex Carter's secure line. He answered immediately, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background of his secure command center. I relayed the new intelligence with absolute surgical precision. I told him about the tablet. I told him about the carbon monoxide canisters wired into the ventilation ducts. I told him we had a maximum execution window of 45 seconds from the moment Victoria touched the screen. "A digital gas chamber," Rex muttered, his voice dropping an octave. "That is old-school cartel brutality mixed with high-tech domestic security. If we alert them, the girl is gone. Standard hostage rescue doctrine goes right out the window. We cannot negotiate with a dead man's switch." "We are not negotiating with anyone," I replied, my voice harder than it had been in decades. "We are going to eliminate the threat. I need a completely silent strike. We have to neutralize Victoria and that tablet, and we have to neutralize Mateo Vargas at the exact same moment. If Vargas drops, Victoria might panic and press the button. If we take the tablet, Vargas will draw his weapon and shoot Maya himself. Simultaneous, invisible termination." Rex confirmed, the tactical gears in his mind already turning. "My cyber team can try to jam the local network, but if the tablet is hardwired to the panic room grid, we have to sever the physical connection. We need eyes inside that office." "Get your men ready immediately," I commanded him. "We are going to wage a silent war today." The heavy steel walls of the moving trailer seemed to press inward as the reality of my command settled over the cold metal table. John Prescott leaned back in his folding chair, removing his expensive glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. He was a man who fought his battles with injunctions, asset freezes, and corporate lawsuits, not firearms and tactical breaches. He looked at me, his sharp legal mind struggling to reconcile the civilized corporate executive he had known for decades with the ruthless commander sitting across from him. "Harrison," he started, his voice measured and highly cautious. "What you are suggesting is an unsanctioned, heavily armed, illegal tactical assault on civilian soil. If this goes wrong, if the authorities catch wind of a private militia storming a downtown office building, the legal fallout will be apocalyptic. You will be facing federal conspiracy charges, kidnapping, and domestic terrorism." I did not even blink. I leaned across the cold table, my eyes locking onto his. "John," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "My daughter has been locked in a soundproof box for 8 months. The woman I married is planning to flush that box with carbon monoxide the moment she gets my signature. I do not care about federal charges. I do not care about my corporate legacy, my stock prices, or my pristine public reputation. If it costs me every single dollar I have ever earned to bring Maya home, I will gladly burn my empire to the ground. There is no legal recourse here. There is only survival. Are you with me, or do I need to ask the driver to pull over and let you out on the highway?" John looked at the digital blueprint of the panic room still glowing brightly on Rex Carter's tactical tablet, then back at me. He slowly put his glasses back on, the professional, icy lawyer returning instantly. "I am with you, Harrison. I will draft a retroactive security authorization tonight. We will legally classify Rex's team as a high-threat extraction detail hired to recover stolen corporate assets. It will not hold up in federal court forever, but it will buy us the confusion and the critical delays we need if the police show up after the smoke clears. Rex grunted his profound approval, his massive arms resting heavily on the table. The legal cover is good, but the tactical reality is a complete nightmare, he said, dragging his thick finger across the digital schematic. Victoria's panic room is completely independent. If we cut the main power to the building, her backup generators will kick in automatically, keeping the ventilation system and the digital locks fully operational. If my men try to drill through that vault door, the intense noise and vibration will alert Vargas immediately. He will draw his weapon. Victoria will tap her screen and the gas will deploy. We cannot simply sneak up on them. We have to completely eliminate their ability to communicate with that room before they even know they are under attack. Rex reached deep into his tactical bag and pulled out a heavy cylindrical object roughly the size of a large thermos. It was encased in matte black metal covered in bright warning labels and manual activation switches. This is a localized electromagnetic pulse generator, Rex explained, setting the heavy device safely on the table. It is strictly military hardware, highly illegal for civilian use. When my team detonates this, it releases a massive burst of concentrated electromagnetic energy that instantly fries every unshielded microchip within a precise 50-foot radius. It will completely destroy Victoria's tablet. It will permanently fry the automated ventilation overrides, the digital locks on the vault door, and Vargas's encrypted cellular communications. The dead man's switch will be instantly bricked. The gas cannot deploy if the computer commanding it ceases to exist. I stared at the black cylinder, marveling at the sheer destructive capability resting on the folding table. It was the perfect silent solution to Victoria's digital guillotine. But a grim realization quickly followed. If the pulse fries the electronic locks on the vault door, the door defaults to its mechanical deadbolts, I deduced, looking up at Rex. Your elite team will not be able to hack the keypad to open it. You will have to breach it manually. Rex nodded, a grim, highly respectful smile touching the corners of his mouth. Exactly. The EMP saves Maya from the lethal gas, but it instantly turns the panic room into a sealed steel vault. My men have the hydraulic breaching tools to force those massive deadbolts open, but those tools are incredibly heavy and slow. From the exact second the pulse goes off and the electronics die, my entry team will need exactly 90 seconds to pry that steel door open. During those specific 90 seconds, Vargas will realize his comms are dead. He will know the power is gone. He will draw his weapon and he will aggressively look for a target. That is exactly where I come in, I said, my voice completely resolute. I will be his target. I am the Trojan horse. John shook his head immediately. Harrison, absolutely no. You cannot be in that room. Vargas is a seasoned cartel enforcer. If he panics, he will shoot the very first person he sees. I must be in that room, I countered, placing my hands flat on the digital schematic. Victoria and Vargas need a compelling reason to be outside the panic room, away from Maya, with their guard completely down. I am the only living person who can orchestrate that scenario. Tomorrow morning, I am going to call Victoria. I will play the broken, exhausted widower. I will tell her that the suffocating grief has finally defeated me. I will agree to unconditionally sign the medical proxy and legally authorize the immediate transfer of the Elysium Trust. But I will explicitly insist on doing it at the Charity Foundation. I will tell her I desperately want to see the place built in Maya's honor one last time before I step away from public life forever. Rex leaned forward, thoroughly analyzing the tactical strategy. She will not be able to resist that bait. She wants the final signature way too badly. She will clear the entire office staff. She will want absolute, uncontested privacy for the financial transaction. Vargas will be standing in the room to supervise, posing as her devoted security. You will walk and hand them the ultimate victory and keep their greedy eyes completely focused on you. I nodded, precisely mapping the specific movements in my head. I will sit at her grand desk. I will demand to read through the heavy documents one last time. I will ask mundane, pathetic questions about the legal phrasing to deliberately waste time and stroke her inflated ego. I will keep Victoria gloating, and I will keep Vargas profoundly bored. I will hold their lethal attention entirely on me, away from the dark hallway, away from the vault door. I will give your tactical team the precious time they need to silently breach the outer perimeter and securely stage the EMP device just outside the main office. Rex tapped the table rhythmically. Once my men are in the perfect position, I will send a single vibrating signal to the encrypted phone in your pocket. That is your final warning. You will have exactly 5 seconds to hit the floor before the powerful pulse detonates. When the EMP triggers, every single light bulb in the building will shatter. The computer screens will violently explode. The electronic locks will instantly die. You will be plunged into absolute disorienting darkness with a highly trained cartel killer. My team will detonate the quiet breaching charges on the main office door simultaneously, but you will have to survive those agonizing 90 seconds while we fight our way inside to permanently neutralize Vargas. I am not afraid of the dark, I replied, staring blankly at the black cylinder. And I am certainly not afraid of Mateo Vargas. I have spent the last 8 horrible months living as a pathetic ghost. Tomorrow afternoon, Victoria is going to learn exactly what happens when the ghost finally fights back. We spent the next hour finalizing the precise timing, the primary entry points, and the secondary extraction routes as the large truck continued its endless rumbling journey through the quiet night. The finalized plan was a massive, incredibly terrifying gamble. I was purposefully walking completely unarmed into a locked, soundproof room with a sociopathic manipulator and a heavily armed cartel killer. I had to perfectly sell the theatrical performance of a lifetime flawlessly playing the pathetic victim, while silently counting down the long seconds to an electromagnetic blast that would plunge us all into absolute chaos. If my voice wavered slightly, if Victoria sensed a hidden trap, or if Vargas saw the elite tactical team moving down the outer hallway, Maya would instantly die. There was absolutely no margin for tactical error. I had exactly 90 seconds to successfully hold the devil's undivided attention, and I fully intended to aggressively use every single one of them. The sun had barely begun to paint the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange when I finally returned to the estate. I slipped back into my bedroom just as the first morning light crept through the heavy drapes. Victoria was still asleep, her breathing slow and perfectly rhythmic. I lay beside her, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, rehearsing the performance of my life. By the time evening arrived, the sprawling dining room felt like a grand theatrical stage, and I was the lead actor preparing for the final tragic act. Maria, our housekeeper, served a quiet dinner of roasted lamb and winter vegetables. The rich aroma filled the room, but my mouth was entirely dry. Every bite I took tasted like dry ash. Victoria sat across from me at the long mahogany table, holding her wineglass with effortless elegance. She wore a soft cashmere sweater, projecting the image of a comforting, deeply devoted wife. She asked me about my day, her voice dripping with artificial empathy, probing to see if my mind was deteriorating exactly as she had planned. I hunched my shoulders forward, letting a visible tremor take hold of my hands. I stared blankly at my plate, allowing the crushing weight of the last 8 months to physically manifest in my posture. "Victoria," I whispered, letting my voice crack with carefully manufactured devastation. "I cannot do this anymore." The words hung in the heavy silence of the dining room. She carefully placed her wineglass on the table, leaning forward with immediate, calculated concern. "What do you mean, Harrison?" she asked softly. I slowly lifted my head, meeting her gaze with eyes I had purposefully rubbed raw and red in the bathroom a few minutes prior. I forced a heavy, agonizing tear to spill over my lower lash line and roll down my cheek. "I am so tired," I choked out, covering my face with my trembling hands. "I am too tired to run the logistics firm. I am too tired to fight the board of directors. Every single time I sit at my desk, all I can see is Maya." Everything I built, this entire massive corporate empire, was supposed to be for her. Now that she is gone, it all feels entirely meaningless. Victoria stood up from her chair, walked gracefully around the long table, and placed her warm hands on my shaking shoulders. She began to massage the tense muscles at the base of my neck. "You are just grieving, darling," she murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of my head. "You need to rest. You need to let go of the immense corporate burden." I reached up and grabbed her hand, squeezing it with desperate, pathetic reliance. "That is exactly what I want to do, Victoria. I want to let it all go." I took a deep, shuddering breath, preparing to drop the ultimate bait. "Do you remember the Elysium Trust?" I asked, my voice barely above a broken whisper. I felt her fingers instantly go rigid against my neck. It was a microscopic physical reaction, a tiny spasm of electrical anticipation, but to me it felt like a thunderclap. "Yes," she replied, keeping her tone flawlessly neutral. "The fund her mother set up for her. It has been locked in probate ever since she disappeared." "It has not been locked in probate," I corrected, gently wiping the fake tears from my face. "I have been secretly reviewing the original charter documents with my primary legal team. Because Maya has been missing for over 6 months, the trust executors have authorized an emergency transfer protocol. The fund is currently holding just over $80 million in liquid assets. I want to transfer every single penny of it directly into your absolute control." I turned around in my chair to look directly into her eyes. For a fraction of a second, the sweet philanthropic mask completely shattered. I saw it. I saw the raw, predatory greed flare in her dark pupils. It was a terrifying, bottomless hunger, a sociopathic thrill at the realization that her long, torturous game was finally paying off. She had starved my daughter and poisoned my mind for nearly a year, and the massive $80 million finish line was finally resting right in front of her. But she was a master manipulator, and she recovered her composure with frightening speed. The flash of greed vanished instantly, replaced by wide, tearful eyes and overwhelming humility. "Oh, Harrison," she gasped, pressing her hand dramatically against her chest. "I could not possibly accept that. That money belongs to Maya's legacy. Exactly, I pleaded, playing the desperate fool. And no one honors her legacy better than you. You have poured your heart into the charity foundation. You are building rehabilitation centers and funding youth programs. If I keep that money, I will just let it rot in an offshore account. I want you to have it. I want you to take the medical proxy, manage my personal affairs, and use the Elysium Trust to change the world. Please, Victoria. Let me sign the papers. Let me finally rest." She let out a long, heavy theatrical sigh, acting as though she was reluctantly accepting a monumental burden out of pure love. "If this is what you truly need to find peace, Harrison, I will do it. I will carry this weight for you. But we should handle the final paperwork quietly. If we do this at the main corporate office, the financial press will catch wind of the massive transfer and the paparazzi will swarm us. I want to protect your privacy. Let us meet at my charity foundation office tomorrow evening, after all the staff have gone home. Just you, me, and the legal documents. It will be peaceful and completely private." I nodded meekly, offering her a fragile, grateful smile. "Thank you, Victoria. Tomorrow evening is perfect." She kissed me again, her lips feeling like dry ice, and walked back to her seat to finish her wine. She was celebrating her ultimate victory. She fully believed I was walking willingly into the slaughterhouse. The next afternoon, the sky over Chicago was a heavy, suffocating blanket of gray clouds threatening a violent storm. I drove my car to a deserted parking garage on the industrial outskirts of the city. Rex Carter was waiting for me in the deep shadows of the concrete structure, standing beside a black, unmarked tactical van. We did not exchange any spoken greetings. We both knew the severe gravity of the next few hours. Rex opened the back doors of the van and motioned for me to step inside. He reached into an equipment bag and pulled out a customized, extremely lightweight Kevlar vest. It was specifically designed to remain completely invisible underneath my tailored suit jacket, yet dense enough to stop bullets. I silently strapped the ballistic armor tightly across my chest. Next, Rex handed me a heavy brushed steel wristwatch. The internal mechanism had been entirely replaced with a localized signal jammer. I silently fastened the cool metal clasp around my left wrist, preparing for a brutal war. It was finally time. The drive to the Charity Foundation headquarters was a blur of rain-slicked streets and flashing traffic lights. The heavy gray clouds that had been threatening the city all afternoon finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour that pounded against the windshield of my car. The rhythmic slapping of the wiper blades was the only sound inside the cabin. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, feeling the dense weight of the hidden Kevlar vest pressing against my ribs and the cool metal of the signal jammer secured tightly around my left wrist. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of the foundation. The lot was completely abandoned. The regular office staff had been dismissed hours ago, deliberately cleared out by Victoria to ensure absolute, uncontested privacy for her final lethal financial transaction. I parked my vehicle, took one last deep breath to steady my racing heart, and stepped out into the damp, echoing concrete cavern. I walked toward the private executive elevator, forcing my shoulders to slump, allowing my steps to shorten into the fragile, hesitant shuffle of a broken, grieving old man. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. The ascent felt like a slow, agonizing descent into a crypt. The doors parted, revealing the dimly lit, perfectly manicured reception area of the foundation. The plush carpets absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I moved down the long, empty corridor toward Victoria's private executive suite. The silence in the building was absolute, but beneath that silence I could feel a dark, suffocating energy radiating from the walls. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. I reached the heavy oak double doors of her office and pushed them open. The room was bathed in the warm golden glow of designer desk lamps intentionally crafted to look inviting and safe. Victoria was seated behind her massive glass desk wearing a tailored black dress that projected mourning and professional elegance. Standing directly behind her, cloaked in the deep shadows of the corner, was Mateo Vargas. He wore a dark suit, his massive arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on me with the cold, dead stare of an apex predator. I stepped over the threshold into the room. Vargas moved immediately. He stepped away from the wall, walked behind me with terrifying silent speed, and grabbed the brass handles of the heavy oak doors. He pulled them shut. The sharp, heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. The trap was officially sprung. I stood in the center of the room looking around with wide, perfectly manufactured confusion. I allowed my hands to tremble slightly as I clutched the lapels of my suit jacket. Victoria stood up and walked around the glass desk, her face arranged in an expression of profound, angelic sympathy. She reached out and took my shaking hands in hers, her touch feeling like absolute poison against my skin. "Harrison, my darling," she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "You made it through the storm. I am so incredibly proud of you for taking this brave step today. I know how agonizing this must be for you, but you are doing the right thing for Maya's legacy." I nodded weakly, letting a single ragged breath escape my lips. "I just want it to be over, Victoria," I whispered, staring down at the floor. "I just want to find some peace." She guided me gently toward the plush leather chair positioned directly in front of her desk. "Sit down," she urged softly. "Everything is completely prepared." I sank heavily into the chair, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. I glanced nervously at Vargas, who had returned to his position in the shadowy corner of the room. His thick hand was resting casually just above his hip, deliberately close to the bulge of a holstered weapon concealed beneath his suit jacket. Victoria returned to her seat and gracefully slid a massive, intimidating stack of legal documents across the smooth glass surface of the desk. The pages were perfectly aligned, filled with dense, impenetrable corporate legalese designed to transfer the entire $80 million Elysium Trust into her absolute uncontested control. Placed meticulously on top of the signature line was a heavy silver-capped Mont Blanc pen. It was the exact same pen I had seen sitting on her desk the day I discovered the hidden switch for the bookshelf. The sight of it made the blood roar in my ears. I slowly reached out and picked up the silver pen, feeling its cold, heavy weight in my palm. My fingers hovered over the signature line. Victoria leaned forward, her dark eyes completely locked onto the tip of the pen, her breath catching slightly in her throat. The raw, unfiltered greed in her gaze was absolutely terrifying. She was literally tasting the money. I lowered the pen, touching the silver tip to the thick white paper, and then I abruptly stopped. I let my hand shake violently, causing the pen to slip from my grasp and clatter loudly against the glass desk. "I cannot read the fine print," I mumbled, patting the pockets of my jacket with frantic, uncoordinated movements. "My reading glasses. I need my reading glasses." Victoria's jaw tightened infinitesimally, a microscopic crack in her perfectly composed facade. "Of course, darling," she said. Her voice strained with carefully suppressed impatience. "Take your time." I pulled my silver-framed glasses from my breast pocket, fumbled with the hinges for a few agonizing seconds, and slowly slid them onto my face. I picked up the heavy documents, brought them close to my eyes, and began to read. I did not skim the paragraphs. I read every single line with excruciating, deliberate slowness. I was counting the seconds in my head, calculating the exact amount of time Rex and his elite tactical team needed to scale the exterior walls of the building in the driving rain. I knew they were currently maneuvering across the slick, treacherous roof, securing their silent, repelling lines directly above the massive architectural skylight that dominated the ceiling of Victoria's office. I had to keep the absolute focus of the two monsters in front of me entirely directed at the desk, completely away from the glass ceiling above us. "Victoria, what exactly does subsection 4 paragraph B mean?" I asked, pointing a trembling finger at the middle of the third page. "It says the designated charitable executor assumes total discretionary allocation privileges. Does that mean the board of directors has to vote on how Maya's money is spent?" Victoria let out a slow, measured breath, forcing a tight smile onto her face. "No, Harrison," she explained softly. "It means I have the sole authority to allocate the funds instantly, without waiting for bureaucratic board approvals. It allows us to help children in need immediately, just as Maya would have wanted." I nodded slowly, turning to the next page, letting the silence stretch out until it became physically painful. "And what about the international tax liabilities regarding the offshore accounts?" I mumbled, squinting at a dense block of text. "My accountants usually handle these specific offshore transfers. Are you absolutely certain this phrasing protects the principal capital from federal tax penalties?" Behind me, I heard the distinct heavy sound of leather creaking. Vargas was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His patience was rapidly evaporating. Victoria looked up at Vargas, shooting him a sharp warning glare before turning her sweet, poisonous smile back to me. "My legal team has reviewed every single syllable, darling," she promised, her voice dropping into a patronizing, soothing cadence. "The capital is completely protected from federal taxes. You do not need to worry about any of these mundane corporate details. That is exactly why you are signing the proxy. You are giving me the burden so you can finally rest. Please, Harrison, just sign the final page." I ignored her plea, turning to the 5th page of the massive contract. I traced the text with my index finger, muttering under my breath, as if I were struggling to comprehend the complex legal terminology. I started rambling about Maya. I talked about her childhood, about the summer we spent in Montana, deliberately weaving nonsensical, nostalgic memories into my questions about the contract. I asked Victoria if she remembered the color of Maya's favorite bicycle, tying the ridiculous question to the funding of a proposed youth program in the documents. I was purposefully playing the deeply confused, utterly broken senior citizen drowning in a sea of grief and dementia. The atmosphere inside the locked office was becoming incredibly toxic. The air felt thick and heavy with suppressed violence. Vargas let out a low, aggressive growl from the dark corner of the room. "We do not have all night for a trip down memory lane, old man," he barked, his heavy cartel accent bleeding through his polished corporate disguise. "Just sign the damn papers so we can all go home." Victoria shot out of her chair, her mask finally slipping. "Mateo, that is enough," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "Have some respect for my husband." I looked up at Vargas, widening my eyes in perfect feigned terror, shrinking back into the plush leather chair. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling violently. "I am just trying to make sure I do the right thing for my little girl. I know she would want everything to be absolutely perfect." Vargas took 2 heavy, intimidating steps toward the glass desk, his hand coming to rest menacingly on the exposed grip of his holstered pistol. He was done playing games. I dropped my gaze back to the documents, gripping the silver Mont Blanc pen with sweating fingers. My internal clock was screaming. Rex needed exactly 90 seconds to position his tactical team above the skylight and arm the localized electromagnetic pulse generator. I had dragged the agonizing charade out for exactly 85 seconds. The crushing pressure in the room was reaching an absolute breaking point. I could practically feel the silent, lethal presence of the ex-SEAL operators hovering just inches above the rain-slicked glass ceiling over our heads. Victoria was standing over me now, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into the soft leather of my chair, completely oblivious to the impending tactical strike. "Sign the paper." "Harrison," she commanded, her voice dropping its sweet pretense, revealing the cold, sociopathic monster lurking underneath. I raised the heavy silver pen, pressed the metallic tip firmly against the black ink of the signature line, and waited for the hidden signal jammer on my wrist to silently vibrate. The heavy silver pen remained perfectly still against the pristine white paper. A small dark ink stain began to bleed into the thick parchment, marking the exact second my entire world shifted. Deep beneath the tailored fabric of my suit jacket, the hidden mechanism strapped to my wrist delivered a sharp, solitary vibration. The 90 seconds had expired. Rex and his tactical team were in position. The agonizing charade was finally over. I did not rush. I did not panic. I simply stopped pretending. I lifted the heavy silver pen from the document and placed it gently on the glass desk with a soft, definitive click. The calculated tremor in my hands vanished instantly, replaced by absolute rock-solid stillness. I let my hunched shoulders drop, rolling my neck slightly as I straightened my spine. The frail, utterly broken widower completely evaporated from the room. I leaned back into the plush leather chair, crossing my legs with the casual, dominant authority of a man who had spent 4 decades crushing corporate rivals and building an empire. I looked up. I did not look at the dangerous cartel killer hovering in the shadows. I locked my eyes directly onto Victoria. The sweet, patronizing sympathy in her gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but I quickly cut her off right there. "I am not signing anything until I see my beautiful daughter, Victoria." My voice was no longer the fragile, trembling whisper of a defeated old man. It was a cold, resonant command forged in the fires of absolute certainty and righteous fury. The words echoed off the soundproof walls of the executive suite, shattering the suffocating tension with the force of a physical blow. The entire room seemed to instantly freeze. The temperature plummeted. The silence that followed was not the quiet anticipation of a business deal closing. It was the deafening silence of a trap being abruptly turned inside out. Victoria froze her hands, hovering awkwardly over the scattered legal documents. The confusion in her dark eyes rapidly mutated. I watched as the sweet, philanthropic mask she had worn for 8 agonizing months completely dissolved. The angelic warmth drained from her face, leaving behind a harsh, angular landscape of pure, unadulterated malice. Her eyes, usually so vibrant and expressive, turned completely dead. They were the flat, empty eyes of a shark, calculating the precise moment to strike its prey. Behind me, the shadows violently shifted. The heavy rustle of a tailored suit jacket was followed by the sharp, terrifying metallic slide of a weapon being drawn. Mateo Vargas moved with the lethal speed of a seasoned executioner. He stepped out of the dark corner, closing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. I did not flinch as the cold, extended barrel of a suppressed semi-automatic pistol pressed firmly against the center of my forehead. The heavy steel of the silencer dug into my skin, a stark reminder of the lethal reality I had willingly walked into. "You are making a very serious mistake, old man," Vargas growled, his voice, a low, vibrating menace that resonated in my chest. "You are going to pick up that pen, you are going to sign those papers, and you are going to do it right now." I kept my eyes locked on Victoria, completely ignoring the cartel enforcer pressing a loaded gun to my skull. "You have always been terribly predictable, Victoria," I said, my tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You thought you could break me with grief. You thought you could sedate me into compliance. You actually believed you were the smartest person in the room. But you made a critical error. You forgot who built the fortune you are so desperate to steal. You forgot who I truly am." Victoria let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It was a dry, scraping sound completely devoid of joy. She slowly lowered her hands to the glass desk, resting her fingertips delicately near the edge of her glowing digital tablet. "You are incredibly foolish, Harrison," she replied, her voice dropping its melodic cadence and adopting a flat, sociopathic rhythm. "I do not know how you managed to snap out of your medicated fog, and frankly, I do not care. You are sitting in my office. You are surrounded by soundproof walls. My associate has a suppressed weapon aimed directly at your brain. You have absolutely no leverage here. You will sign the proxy, or Mateo will paint my expensive carpet with your blood, and I will forge your signature myself." I smiled. It was a cold, humorless expression that mirrored her own dead eyes. "You will not forge anything," I countered calmly. "Because if I do not walk out of this building alive, my primary legal team has explicit written instructions to automatically liquidate the Elysium Trust and donate every single penny to federal cancer research. The money will be permanently locked in a charitable escrow account within 10 minutes of my death. You will get nothing, and your cartel friends down south will hold you entirely responsible for their missing capital." Victoria stared at me, her mind rapidly processing the tactical shift. She knew I was not bluffing. She knew I had the corporate infrastructure to execute that exact contingency plan. She slowly moved her hand away from the legal documents and reached for a heavy decorative brass pen holder sitting near her computer monitor. I had assumed it was merely an expensive paperweight. I was wrong. "I do not have time for your pathetic corporate chess games, Harrison," she stated coldly. "You want to see your daughter? Fine. I will show you exactly what is at stake." Victoria grasped the base of the brass penholder and twisted it sharply to the right. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from the far wall of the office, vibrating through the floorboards. The massive floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelf, loaded with heavy legal volumes and decorative artifacts, groaned loudly. I watched in grim fascination as the entire structure smoothly unlatched from the wall and began to slide backward on a set of hidden industrial tracks. The bookshelf parted like a heavy theater curtain, revealing the dark, terrifying secret Victoria had concealed behind it. The hidden panic room was suddenly exposed to the warm light of the executive suite. The air inside the hidden chamber was visibly colder, spilling out into the office like a freezing fog. The stark, blinding white walls of the soundproof cell were illuminated by the harsh fluorescent bulbs mounted securely in the reinforced ceiling. And there, sitting on the thin, stained mattress, was Maya. My breath caught painfully in my throat. Seeing her through the digital screen of a stolen surveillance feed was agonizing, but seeing her in person, breathing the same air, was a profound physical shock. She looked incredibly fragile. Her clothes were loose and unwashed. Her beautiful face was pale, drawn tight with severe malnutrition and relentless psychological terror. The heavy steel chain securing her ankle to the floor clanked loudly. She slowly raised her hands against the painfully bright light, trembling violently. My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces at the sight of her. Maya, my brilliant, vibrant daughter, had been reduced to a fragile ghost, chained like an animal, in a freezing, sterile box right beneath my feet. A strangled, agonizing sob ripped from my throat. I surged forward, every instinct in my body screaming to tear the heavy steel door off its hinges and crush the life out of the people who put her there. But Vargas was infinitely faster. He rammed the heavy steel suppressor of his pistol hard against the bridge of my nose, snapping my head back and forcing me violently down into the leather chair. The cold metal left a stinging bruise across my skin. "Stay exactly where you are, old man," Vargas warned, his voice low and vibrating with absolute lethal intent. "One twitch, one sudden breath, and I will scramble your brains across this expensive mahogany desk." Victoria walked slowly around the desk, her high heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. She moved with the predatory grace of a spider, trapping a fly in its web. She stood directly between me and the open vault door, completely blocking my view of my weeping daughter. A chilling, triumphant smile stretched across her face, completely devoid of any human empathy. She had finally dropped the heavy, exhausting mask of the grieving, supportive wife. The woman standing in front of me was a hollow, calculating monster, fueled entirely by sociopathic greed and pure survival instinct. "You really thought you understood this game, Harrison?" sneered, her voice echoing with a dark, melodic cruelty. "You thought I was just another greedy socialite looking for a comfortable retirement fund. You thought I married you because I wanted a massive mansion and a platinum credit card. You have always been so incredibly arrogant, so completely blind to the reality of the world operating right outside your pathetic corporate bubble." She leaned over the desk, resting her hands flat against the glass, bringing her face uncomfortably close to mine. "I did not target you for your wealth, Harrison. I targeted you out of absolute terrifying necessity. 5 years ago, I made a catastrophic error in judgment. I invested heavily in a shadow development project operating out of Sinaloa. I borrowed $50 million from the exact people Mateo represents. When the federal authorities raided the compound and seized the assets, my cartel investors did not write it off as a business loss. They demanded their principal capital back, along with an astronomical premium. They gave me an ultimatum: find the money, or they would methodically dismantle me piece by piece. I stared at her, feeling the cold, sickening truth washing over me. "You were always a stepping stone, Harrison," she whispered, her dark eyes flashing with malicious delight. "You were nothing more than a convenient, highly liquid asset waiting to be harvested." The sheer magnitude of her deception was suffocating. I struggled to process the timeline she was laying out. 5 years ago, my first wife, Eleanor, was still alive. Eleanor had been healthy, vibrant, and fiercely protective of our family assets. She never would have allowed Victoria to get close to me. My mind violently connected the missing pieces. I looked up at Victoria, a horrifying realization freezing the blood in my veins. Eleanor did not die of a sudden neurological failure, I choked out, my voice trembling with raw, unfiltered horror. Victoria tilted her head back and let out a bright, genuine laugh. It was the most disturbing sound I had ever heard. "It took you this long to figure it out," she mocked, shaking her head in theatrical disappointment. "Your brilliant doctors were completely baffled. They called it a rapid, aggressive autoimmune degeneration. They tested her for every obscure disease on the planet, but they never tested her for a customized synthetic neurotoxin synthesized in a cartel laboratory." She began to pace slowly across the expensive carpet, relishing every single syllable of her confession. "It took me nearly 10 months to kill her, Harrison. I had to be incredibly patient. I slipped the chemical compound into her morning tea, into her wine glasses, into her daily vitamins. I sat by her hospital bed and held her hand while she slowly suffocated in her own failing body. I cried at her funeral, And then I waited exactly 6 months before conveniently bumping into the lonely, devastated widower at that charity gala. You were so desperate for a companion, so desperate for a comforting hand to hold in the dark. You practically begged me to take control of your life. A guttural roar built deep in my chest. I wanted to kill her. I wanted to wrap my hands around her throat and squeeze the life out of her body. But Vargas pressed the pistol harder against my skull, clicking the hammer back with a sharp, terrifying metallic snap. "Sit still," Vargas commanded. Victoria turned her attention back to the open vault door. Maya was huddled on the mattress, her hands clamped tightly over her ears, weeping uncontrollably, as she listened to the monster casually confess to murdering her mother. "Your daughter, however, was a completely unexpected complication," Victoria continued, glaring at the shivering girl in the cell. "She was always too curious for her own good. 8 months ago, while I was hosting a charity luncheon, Maya broke into my private study. She was looking for financial discrepancies in the foundation accounts, but she found something significantly worse. She found the encrypted digital receipts for the chemical compounds I purchased from cartel associates. She printed them out. She was packing her bags to go directly to the federal authorities. Victoria walked into the freezing panic room. Maya scrambled backward, pressing her thin shoulders against the stark white wall, her eyes wide with absolute terror. Victoria reached down, grabbed my daughter by her tangled hair, and violently dragged her forward. Maya let out a sharp, agonizing shriek, struggling weakly against the iron grip. "I could not just kill her," Victoria explained, dragging Maya toward a heavy steel pedestal mounted near the vault entrance. "A sudden violent death would have triggered an automatic autopsy and a massive police investigation. So I fabricated the tragic drug relapse narrative. I paid off a corrupt private clinic to verify her fictional medical records. I locked her in this box and told you she ran away. I let your own paternal guilt completely paralyze your judgment while I systematically drained your accounts." Victoria forced Maya down onto her knees in front of the steel pedestal. A sleek black biometric scanner was embedded in the center of the metal console. "The Elysium Trust is heavily fortified," Harrison Victoria stated, her voice returning to its cold, sociopathic rhythm. "The primary security protocol requires dual authentication. It requires your absolute legal proxy, which you are going to sign right now, and it requires the direct biological confirmation of the primary beneficiary." She violently pushed her trembling right hand onto the biometric scanner. The console immediately chimed twice. "Now sign the final release, or Damien puts a bullet in your head," and I gassed the girl. The metallic click of the pistol hammer locking into place echoed in the freezing air spilling from the open vault. Mateo Vargas stood completely still, his dark eyes devoid of any human hesitation. The heavy steel suppressor rested flush against the skin of my forehead. I could feel the cold, unforgiving circle of the muzzle pressing directly into bone. Most men would have broken right there. Most men would have grabbed the heavy silver pen, dropped to their knees, and surrendered their entire corporate empire just to buy one more breath. But I was no longer an ordinary man. I was a father who had already walked through the darkest, most agonizing valleys of grief, and I had returned with a heart forged of absolute iron. I did not look at the gun. I did not look at the heavily armed cartel enforcer holding it. I looked straight past them both, focusing my entire existence on the fragile, shivering girl, kneeling on the cold floor of the panic room. Maya was staring back at me. Her wide, terrified eyes were silently begging me to save her, but beneath the absolute terror, I saw the flickering, unbreakable ember of my daughter. I saw the brilliant, resilient young woman who had bravely tried to expose a murderer. I held her gaze, refusing to let the panic bleed into my expression. I needed to silently communicate to her that the endless nightmare was finally coming to an end. I softened my eyes, sending a silent, unconditional wave of love and absolute reassurance across the room. I held my posture perfectly rigid, conveying a quiet, indestructible strength. I watched the frantic, shallow rhythm of her breathing begin to marginally slow. She saw the subtle shift in me. She saw the corporate titan who had ruthlessly conquered every adversary he had ever faced, not the weeping, defeated ghost Victoria had paraded around the estate for the past 8 months. I slowly turned my attention back to the monster standing near the biometric scanner. Victoria was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with predatory anticipation. She fully expected me to crumble. She expected me to sob and beg for my daughter's life. Instead, I leaned back against the plush leather of the chair, folding my hands casually in my lap, completely ignoring the loaded weapon aimed squarely at my skull. "You actually believe this is going to work, Victoria?" I asked. My voice was incredibly calm, resonating with a deep, authoritative cadence that seemed to catch her entirely off guard. "You truly believe you can wire $80 million into untraceable offshore cartel accounts, murder an esteemed corporate executive and his daughter in a downtown charity office, and simply walk away, scot-free, to enjoy your spoils? Sign the paper, Harrison," she commanded, her voice rising in pitch, the polished aristocratic veneer beginning to show severe fractures. I shook my head slowly, adopting a look of profound, mocking pity. "Your accounting was always incredibly sloppy, Victoria. It was the very first thing I noticed when we married. You possess a remarkable talent for spending other people's money, but you possess absolutely no talent for covering your digital footprints. Do you really think my private financial team stopped monitoring the Elysium Trust when you had me sedated with your carefully prescribed pills? Do you think I did not have algorithmic safeguards tracking every single unauthorized inquiry made into my personal estate? I have known about your catastrophic shadow investments for weeks. I know exactly how much you owe the Sinaloa Syndicate. I know you are drowning in debt, and I know you are utterly terrified." Vargas pressed the barrel harder against my forehead. "Shut your mouth and pick up the pen," he barked, his finger tightening incrementally on the curved metal trigger. I did not even blink at him. "You hired a cartel enforcer to play a glorified bodyguard." I continued, my gaze fixed relentlessly on Victoria. "You brought a known, internationally wanted criminal into my highly scrutinized corporate sphere. Did you honestly believe your brutal employers down south were going to let you walk away and enjoy the remaining $30 million of my trust fund? You are a massive liability to them, Victoria. The exact moment that money clears their hidden ledgers, Mateo is not going to politely escort you to a private jet. He is going to put a bullet in the back of your head and dump your body in an industrial incinerator. You are not a brilliant master strategist. You are a desperate, foolish amateur who played a dangerous game far beyond her intellectual capacity." The brutal, unapologetic truth of my words hit her like a physical strike. Her face flushed with sudden, violent rage. The meticulous, calculating control she had maintained for years completely shattered. She shrieked a raw, guttural sound of pure, helpless frustration and completely abandoned the biometric pedestal. She marched aggressively back to her massive glass desk, her expensive heels stomping against the hardwood floor. She snatched the glowing digital tablet from its charging dock, her hands trembling with unchecked fury. "You arrogant, pathetic old fool," she spat, holding the tablet up high so I could clearly see the screen. The application interface was glowing brightly in the dim atmospheric light of the office. A large, pulsing red icon sat directly in the center of the high-definition display, commanding the deadly mechanical ventilation overrides wired directly into the walls of the cell. My internal clock was ticking relentlessly. The 90 seconds Rex had explicitly requested were rapidly evaporating. The electromagnetic pulse was absolutely imminent. I just needed to hold her complete, undivided attention for a few more agonizing moments. I needed to ensure she did not press that screen until the military-grade pulse permanently severed the digital connection. "You think you have beaten me," Victoria screamed, her voice echoing wildly off the soundproof walls. "You think your brilliant corporate safeguards mean anything in this locked room. I have the ultimate authority right here in my hand. I control who breathes and who suffocates. I spent a year orchestrating this exact moment. I slowly poisoned your first wife. I locked your precious daughter in a frozen cage. I broke your mind until you were crying and begging me to take your money. And now you sit there looking down the barrel of a gun, trying to lecture me on strategy." I remained entirely impassive, my face a mask of cold, unyielding stone. "You are stalling, Victoria," I taunted softly. You are stalling because you know I am absolutely right. You know the cartel is going to execute you the moment you outlive your usefulness." She let out another furious shriek, her composure entirely gone. She raised the tablet higher, her thumb hovering mere millimeters over the pulsing red execution command. Mateo cocked the hammer she ordered, her voice completely unhinged. Vargas manually pulled the slide of the heavy pistol back a fraction of an inch, ensuring a deadly round was perfectly chambered and ready to fire. The metallic scraping sound was deafening in the enclosed space. He shifted his athletic stance, bracing himself to absorb the imminent recoil. "I have had enough of your arrogant corporate lectures," Victoria yelled, stepping quickly around the desk so she was standing directly beside the cartel enforcer. She pointed the glowing tablet toward me, her thumb shaking violently over the smooth glass screen. "You have exactly 10 seconds to pick up that silver pen and sign the final release." My internal countdown reached the final 5 seconds. 5. 10 seconds. Harrison. Victoria screamed, her beautiful face contorted into a terrifying mask of absolute desperate madness. "Sign it right now." 4. I looked directly past the lethal gun, past the glowing digital tablet, and held my beautiful daughter's terrified gaze one last time. 9. Victoria shouted, her voice completely cracking. 8. 7. 3. I slowly lowered my hands from my lap, pressing my palms flat against the soft leather armrests of the chair, preparing my muscles for the violent, explosive shift in gravity. 6. 5. If you do not sign that paper, I will press this button and I will watch the girl suffocate, she threatened, her thumb grazing the very edge of the deadly red icon. 2. I took a deep, steadying breath, pulling the cool, conditioned air deep into my lungs. "Sign it," she commanded one final time, her voice reaching a hysterical, frantic pitch. 1, 0. "I think I will pass," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, toxic air of the executive office like a freshly sharpened blade. I did not blink. I did not move my head away from the cold steel of the heavy suppressor pressed firmly against my skin. Instead, I calmly shifted my left hand from the armrest of the plush leather chair and brought my thumb to rest against the edge of my brushed steel wristwatch. I looked directly into Victoria's eyes, watching the absolute certainty of her impending victory radiate from her beautiful, monstrous face. She fully believed she had won. She fully believed my spirit was broken and my daughter was about to die. I pressed the hidden button on the side of the metal casing. The mechanical click was entirely silent, swallowed by the heavy tension of the room, but the reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The localized electromagnetic pulse detonated. There was no massive fireball, no deafening explosion, no concussive shockwave to throw us across the room. Instead, it was an invisible, catastrophic wave of highly concentrated energy that instantly ripped the life out of every single microchip within a 50-foot radius. The resulting death of the electronic world was profound and immediate. The warm, golden designer lamps illuminating the office snapped off with a sharp, synchronized crack. The massive computer monitors on the glass desk violently sparked and died, their screens fading to a dull, lifeless gray. The gentle ambient hum of the automated climate control system abruptly stopped, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. Even the subtle, barely audible buzz of the digital locks securing the heavy oak doors vanished. The transition from a brightly lit, high-tech executive suite to an absolute pitch-black tomb took less than a fraction of a second. The sudden darkness was completely disorienting, a heavy physical curtain that dropped over my eyes and instantly stole my vision. For a single suspended heartbeat, the room was trapped in a vacuum of total confusion. Then the panic set in. Through the absolute darkness, I heard the frantic, desperate sound of flesh slapping against glass. Victoria was blindly stabbing her fingers against the screen of her tablet. Her breathing had completely lost its controlled sociopathic rhythm, replaced by rapid, shallow gasps of genuine terror. "Nothing is happening," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the soundproof walls. "The screen is dead. The entire system is completely unresponsive. Mateo, the override, is not working. The panic in her voice was absolute music to my ears. The brilliant, flawlessly executed trap she had spent 8 long months building had just been completely neutralized by a single invisible pulse of energy. She tapped the dead glass harder, the frantic clicking sound serving as a pathetic rhythm to her rapidly unraveling sanity. "Turn the power back on," she commanded the empty darkness, as if her sheer aristocratic will could somehow force the fried microprocessors back to life. Beside me, Mateo Vargas let out a vicious curse in Spanish. The seasoned cartel enforcer instantly realized the gravity of the tactical situation. The sudden localized power failure was not a mere coincidence or a municipal blackout. He knew they were under attack. The heavy barrel of the suppressed pistol shifted away from my forehead as Vargas instinctively stepped back, moving to place his back against the nearest solid wall to minimize his exposure. He was completely blind in the windowless office, relying entirely on his combat training to survive. He began to issue rapid, aggressive orders to Victoria, demanding she drop the useless tablet and get behind the heavy glass desk. But Victoria was entirely consumed by her own failure, still desperately clawing at the dead screen, completely unwilling to accept that her $80 million prize had just vanished into the dark. I did exactly what Rex had explicitly instructed me to do. I threw myself out of the leather chair, diving hard toward the floor and rolling tightly under the thick, protective overhang of the heavy mahogany desk. I curled my body into a tight ball, wrapping my arms over my head and squeezing my eyes shut. I had perfectly played my role. I had delivered the Trojan horse. I had successfully held their undivided attention for the crucial 90 seconds. Now it was time for the absolute devastation to begin. The reinforced architectural skylight, positioned directly above the center of the office, suddenly shattered inward with a catastrophic, deafening crash. Hundreds of jagged shards of thick tempered glass rained down from the ceiling like a violent crystalline hailstorm, smashing against the furniture and ripping into the plush carpet. Before the heavy glass had even finished hitting the floor, 3 compact metallic canisters dropped through the open hole in the roof, bouncing harshly against the hardwood. Vargas roared in the darkness, blindly raising his weapon toward the shattered ceiling, desperate to acquire a target. He never even had the chance to pull the trigger. The stun grenades detonated simultaneously. The enclosed soundproof office amplified the explosive force tenfold. A blinding, searing flash of pure white light instantly obliterated the pitch-black darkness burning through my tightly closed eyelids with agonizing intensity. It was brighter than staring directly into the midday sun. A fraction of a second later, the concussive bang hit. It was a massive physical wall of sound that violently hammered against my chest and completely ruptured my sense of balance. Even with my hands clamped tightly over my ears, the noise was absolutely paralyzing. A high-pitched, continuous ringing immediately flooded my head, drowning out the terrified screams of my wife and the heavy thud of the cartel enforcer hitting the floor. The flashbangs were designed to completely overload the sensory processing centers of the human brain, inducing instant crippling vertigo and absolute blindness. Victoria and Vargas were completely incapacitated, their nervous systems violently scrambled by the sheer concussive force of the military-grade pyrotechnics. Through the ringing in my ears and the harsh, strobing afterimages burning my retinas, I felt the heavy vibrating impact of boots hitting the floorboards. Rex Carter and his elite tactical team dropped through the shattered skylight like heavily armored shadows falling from the sky. They moved with terrifying, absolute precision. There was no shouting, no hesitation, no wasted motion. They were a perfectly synchronized machine of pure kinetic violence. In the lingering, chaotic haze of the stun grenades, I watched a massive figure clad entirely in black tactical gear step smoothly over the broken glass. He approached the disoriented, reeling cartel enforcer with ruthless efficiency. Vargas was crawling blindly on his hands and knees, desperately trying to locate his dropped weapon. A heavy combat boot swung forward, striking him violently beneath the jaw with a sickening crunch. Vargas collapsed onto the carpet, completely neutralized before he could even process the direction of the brutal strike. Victoria was cowering helplessly against the cold wall, whimpering uncontrollably as two masked operatives swiftly secured her trembling wrists with heavy industrial zip ties. The unprecedented, highly volatile silent breach was perfectly executed without a single casualty, and the absolute uncontested control of the room was finally mine, completely mine. "I think I will pass," I said, my voice completely steady as I lifted my left hand and pressed the hidden button on the side of my brushed steel wristwatch. The mechanical click was entirely silent, swallowed by the heavy tension radiating through the executive suite, but the reaction was instantaneous and absolutely apocalyptic. The localized electromagnetic pulse detonated with devastating precision. There was no massive fireball, no deafening explosion, and no concussive shockwave to throw us violently across the room. Instead, it was an invisible, catastrophic wave of highly concentrated energy that instantly ripped the life out of every single microchip and electronic circuit within a 50-foot radius. The resulting death of the digital world was profound and immediate. The warm golden designer lamps illuminating the office snapped off with a sharp synchronized crack. The massive computer monitors on the glass desk violently sparked and died, their vibrant screens fading to a dull, lifeless gray. The gentle ambient hum of the automated climate control system abruptly stopped, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence that pressed heavily against my eardrums. Even the subtle, barely audible buzz of the biometric scanner pedestal and the digital locks securing the heavy oak doors completely vanished. The transition from a brightly lit, high-tech corporate fortress to an absolute pitch-black tomb took less than a fraction of a second. The sudden darkness was completely disorienting, a heavy physical curtain that dropped violently over my eyes and instantly stole my vision. The digital execution command Victoria had been holding over my head was entirely neutralized, permanently erasing her leverage and plunging her brilliant, deadly trap into total, irreversible darkness. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the room was trapped in a vacuum of complete sensory deprivation. Then the absolute panic set in. Through the thick, ink-black void, I heard the frantic, desperate sound of human flesh slapping violently against smooth glass. Victoria was completely unequipped to handle the sudden loss of tactical superiority. Her meticulous, perfectly calculated extortion plot had depended entirely on having absolute control over the digital environment, and now that environment was completely dead. She was blindly stabbing her trembling fingers against the unresponsive screen of her tablet, desperately trying to force the lethal command through the fried circuits. Her breathing had completely lost its controlled sociopathic rhythm, replaced by rapid, shallow gasps of genuine, unadulterated terror. "The screen is dead," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the soundproof walls of the executive suite. "The entire system is completely unresponsive. I press the button, but nothing is happening." The sheer panic in her voice was absolute music to my ears. The brilliant, flawlessly executed trap she had spent 8 long months building had just been neutralized by a single invisible pulse of energy. She tapped the dead glass harder, the frantic, repetitive clicking sound serving as a pathetic rhythm to her rapidly unraveling sanity. She realized with horrifying clarity that she had completely lost her $80 million prize, and worse, she had lost the ability to execute the girl in the cell. "Turn the power back on right now," she commanded the empty darkness, screaming with raw desperation, as if her sheer aristocratic will could somehow force the utterly destroyed microprocessors back to life. But the tablet remained a useless dead piece of glass in her shaking hands. Beside her, Damien reacted with the lethal, conditioned reflexes of a professional cartel enforcer. He did not waste precious breath screaming at the darkness like Victoria. The sudden localized power failure was not a mere municipal blackout, and his finely tuned combat instincts immediately recognized the gravity of the tactical shift. He knew they were suddenly highly vulnerable. The heavy steel barrel of the suppressed pistol shifted rapidly away from my head, as Damien instinctively stepped backward, moving to place his broad shoulders against the nearest solid wall to minimize his exposure to the pitch-black room. He was completely blind in the windowless executive suite, relying entirely on his hearing and his spatial memory to survive the impending assault. He began to issue rapid aggressive commands to Victoria in harsh whispered Spanish, demanding she drop the useless device and get down behind the heavy mahogany desk. But before Damien could successfully adjust his vision to the profound darkness, and before Victoria could even comprehend the urgent instructions, the reinforced architectural skylight, positioned directly above the center of the office, violently yielded. The massive pane of thick bullet-resistant glass had been quietly scored and prepped by Rex's team during my agonizingly long negotiation. Now it shattered inward with a catastrophic, absolutely deafening crash. Hundreds of jagged, heavy shards of thick, tempered glass rained down from the high ceiling like a violent crystalline hailstorm, smashing brutally against the expensive furniture and ripping deeply into the plush carpet. The sudden, violent destruction of the skylight ripped away the suffocating silence of the room, replacing it with the terrifying sound of falling debris and the heavy rushing wind pouring in from the stormy night sky above us. I did exactly what I had been trained to do in the event of an absolute tactical breach. I threw my body tightly against the metal base of the heavy leather chair, burying my face deeply into my crossed arms and sealing my eyes completely shut. Before the final pieces of heavy glass had even finished hitting the floorboards, 3 compact metallic canisters dropped swiftly through the open hole in the roof, bouncing harshly against the ruined carpet. Damien blindly raised his weapon toward the shattered ceiling, desperately trying to acquire a viable target in the pitch-black space. He never even had the fraction of a second required to pull the trigger. The military-grade stun grenades detonated simultaneously. The enclosed soundproof walls of the executive office amplified the explosive force tenfold. A blinding, searing flash of pure white light instantly obliterated the darkness, burning violently through the blackness with agonizing intensity. It was vastly brighter than staring directly into the core of the midday sun. A microscopic second later, the concussive bang hit. It was a massive physical wall of pure kinetic sound that violently hammered against my chest and completely ruptured my sense of balance. Even with my hands clamped tightly over my ears, the noise was absolutely paralyzing. A high-pitched, continuous ringing immediately flooded my head, entirely drowning out the terrified screams of my wife and the heavy thud of the cartel enforcer hitting the floor. The flashbangs were designed to completely overload the sensory processing centers of the human brain, inducing instant crippling vertigo and absolute total blindness. Victoria and Damien were completely incapacitated, their nervous systems violently scrambled by the sheer concussive force of the pyrotechnics. Through the ringing in my ears and the harsh strobing afterimages burning my retinas, I felt the heavy, vibrating impact of boots hitting the floorboards. Rex Carter and his elite tactical team dropped smoothly through the shattered skylight, descending fast on rappelling lines, like heavily armored shadows falling directly from the stormy sky. The unprecedented, highly volatile, silent breach was perfectly executed, establishing absolute uncontested dominance over the room in mere seconds. I held Maya tightly against my chest, feeling the violent tremors racking her fragile body slowly begin to subside in the safety of my arms. I whispered into her hair, promising her that the endless nightmare was permanently over, that no one would ever hurt her again. Outside the shattered skylight, the distant rising wail of police sirens began to cut sharply through the heavy storm. Rex and his tactical team quickly secured the perimeter of the executive suite, but the official cavalry was already arriving in full force. I had instructed my lead corporate attorney, John Prescott, to coordinate directly with the local authorities while we executed the silent breach. John had delivered a massive mountain of irrefutable evidence to the district attorney hours ago, detailing every single fraudulent wire transfer, the dangerous cartel connections, and the completely falsified medical records Victoria had used to hide my daughter from the world. The heavy oak doors of the executive suite were suddenly thrown open. Dozens of heavily armed police officers flooded into the dark room, their bright tactical flashlights piercing the lingering smoke from the stun grenades. They found Victoria sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, her wrists securely bound with thick zip ties, her carefully constructed empire completely reduced to ash. Damien was hauled roughly to his feet, his shattered arm hanging uselessly at his side, his face a grim mask of silent, defeated agony. As the officers dragged the two criminals out of the ruined office and marched them down the long, opulent corridor, the scene was witnessed by the returning late shift of her own charity staff. The very people Victoria had manipulated and used to build her pristine philanthropic facade watched in stunned absolute silence as their angelic leader was paraded past them in cold steel handcuffs. Her flawless public reputation was instantaneously and permanently obliterated. By the following morning, the federal authorities had completely taken over the investigation. The FBI immediately seized Victoria's frozen offshore accounts and began systematically dismantling the lethal cartel network she had so foolishly entangled herself with. She was facing multiple life sentences in federal prison, entirely isolated and universally despised by the society she had tried to conquer. But I did not care about her impending trial. I did not care about the massive media spectacle that erupted around my family. My entire existence was completely focused on one single vital objective, which was Maya's physical and mental recovery. I immediately liquidated the fraudulent charitable foundation, tearing the Elysium Trust down to its very studs. In its place, I established a genuine, heavily endowed foundation dedicated entirely to rescuing and rehabilitating victims of severe psychological and physical abuse. I made absolutely certain that Victoria's stolen wealth was redirected to heal the exact kind of trauma she had inflicted upon my child. Maya spent months in a specialized, highly secure recovery facility, surrounded by the absolute best trauma specialists the world could offer. It was a slow, agonizingly difficult journey, but piece by piece my beautiful daughter returned to me. Today, as I stand by the massive glass windows of my corner office looking out over the sprawling global logistics empire I built from nothing, I feel a profound sense of peace. The corporate legacy, the billions of dollars, the vast fleets of ships and planes, none of it truly matters to me anymore. The only legacy that holds any real value is the brilliant, resilient young woman standing right beside me, fully prepared to take the reins when the exact right time finally comes. We have walked through the burning fires of hell together and emerged much stronger, completely united, and entirely ready to conquer whatever the unknown future holds. I look deeply at her beautiful, smiling face and know, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that our enduring and deeply bonded bloodline has successfully survived the very worst of human darkness forever. Sometimes the most dangerous predators do not hide in the dark. They sit across from you at the dinner table disguised as the people you trust. True strength is never just about physical power. It is about the cold, calculating patience required to outsmart those who underestimate you because of your age or grief. Family is not just about the titles we give each other. It is defined by absolute loyalty, action, and truth. Never let your love blind you to glaring red flags, and never underestimate a father's relentless determination to protect his precious flesh bone and beloved blood. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss an update. Leave a comment below telling me which city you are watching from today. I read every single comment and truly appreciate your amazing and continued support.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly,